Welcome to the Good Grief Conversation. I'm your host, Janet Jones, and you're listening to UK Health Radio. This programme brings you honest, gritty, emotional and inspiring conversation around a subject that affects all of us, yet is still very much taboo. So join me now for this inspiring Good Grief Conversation. Hi and welcome back to the Good Grief Conversation. I'm your host, Janet Jones, and today we are doing something a little bit different. It is a special week this week. It is Baby Loss Awareness Week. And in the last few months, I have had the privilege to speak with three amazing women who have lost their children as babies, and their lives are incredible. They are so inspirational. So when I discovered that it was Baby Loss Awareness Week, I asked my lovely editor, John, if we could squeeze this program in, because I just thought if I can bring in the sound bites from those conversations, then this will be a very powerful show this week. So my guests are Nikki Pattinson, Wendy Blackstern and Ashley Jones, and they all have three incredibly different and inspiring stories. If you would like to hear the full version of those conversations, then just go to www.thegoodgriefconversation.com and click on the Listen Now button. And when you do that, that will go to all of the shows that are available for you over at UK Health Radio. So just click on there. You'll find that Nikki's show is episode 3, so right at the beginning. You may have to just search a little bit for that one. And Wendy is episode 21, and Ashley's show will be out next week, so that will be episode 24. In the meantime, we have these sound bites of the conversation that we found truly inspiring. So I hope that you find that they're inspiring, touching, and that they help you on your journey too. And at this point, I would also like to say that I am sending a lot of love your way, and that I send courage and bravery for you on your journey. So if you found yourself here because you are in this same situation, then you have my love and you have the love of all my guests. So my first guest is going to be Nikki. And Nikki and I, we're friends. We go back a long way. And I know that her son Jackson, who died at the age of 4, just over 4 months, he has been a great inspiration to Nikki. But I won't tell you too much about her. I will hand you over to Nikki, and she honestly and carefully shares her story with lots of compassion and love. I came across Nikki back in 2005. She was doing a talk at a business conference that I was at because of my photography business at the time, and I was truly inspired by Nikki's story. Back then, I thought this woman is amazing. She has been inspired by the greatest loss that any woman could go through, and that is the loss of a child. I had no idea then that that was on my path too, but her story was just incredible. And she was one of the first people who I contacted when I lost my son, because I knew that she could help me. I knew that she would get me. I wanted to know about the pain and anger that Nikki would have inevitably have gone through, and how she managed to get on with life soon after losing Jackson.
You know, I've been talking to somebody about it this morning. I'm a child of the late 50s, and you know, our parents had just, been in the war, and emotion wasn't a word that we ever saw or heard. The love word were never mentioned. You know, my mother told me, put him out for 4 hours in the morning, bring him in, whether it's raining, whatever, you feed him, you put him, but you only pick him up for 20 minutes. And also the state that my husband was in. And it's much more difficult to deal with other people's emotions than your own. Much more difficult. We opened a market stall in Chesterfield and I used to cry all the way down M1, get it car, start crying when I saw the cranes by Meadowhall, cry all the way to the car park, get out, go to work. Nobody knew who I was. It was that way up. We did this 6 weeks after he died. Get back in the car after work, cry all the way to the cranes, stop crying. And that's how I did it. But it is a physical ache and the pain in my heart. And I'm not being over freaking flowery here. I'm telling you as was, hurt that much that one night I actually put my hands over the gas flame because I wanted to hurt on the outside as much as I hurt on the inside. And then the immense guilt and the immense anger of how dare they throw my son upstairs. And I knew what they were telling the police hadn't stuck up. Well, he fell asleep, so we just put him upstairs. No, that baby never fell asleep. And I know what happened to him. But you know what? To a bit of compassion, I actually rang the woman that had him, and I rang her on the 10th anniversary. And she said, oh, I know the voice. I'm not sure who it is. And I goes, well, look at the calendar. She goes, oh, hello, Nikki. And I said, I just want to tell you that we have lived through hell. Me and my family. My father was struck dumb. He couldn't speak for days. My mother, she had a bad heart. She had an heart operation that it killed them. There is no question. It killed them. And also, we all know the damage that is far and wide. But I said, I've often thought that I would rather be me than you, because you've got to live with that. You did it.
I asked Nikki how and why Jackson inspired her.
Because I know that I've got two choices, because I know I've got to meet him again. And I know that I turn up in heaven, and none of us know whenever that's going to be. And he either goes, been better off if I hadn't been born, lady. She never did anything, did you? You were defined, Mum, by the fact that you'd lost a child, where actually you could have been somebody. Or he says, I don't know how the bloody hell you did that, Mum. That was amazing. It's going to be the latter, because for me, there is nowhere else to go. I've still got two children. One is here. The other one is in eternity, so I know what I've got to do. And it gave me a skill. I do a lot of project work. I'm a speaker. I talk about advanced connection. I go into supermarkets and show people how to sell more tins of beans, whatever. But it's never about what you sell. It's always who you are and your life and how you've dealt with your life up to that point. And I can walk into any shop floor and it's like, right, I need to speak to you. I need to speak to you. Come here. And there is a connection that wouldn't have been there without it. And I think it's him helping me. I don't know. But it's made me more compassionate, intuitive. I haven't even started yet. I can't leave this planet until I've made something of myself to my standards, not to anybody else's, partly for me and partly for him. But it's out of our hands. It's not for us to choose. And, how do we know? And for me, this is perhaps my reality. And I have had 30 years to think about it. If I can just say, anybody that's thinking, 30 years, bloody hell, and she's still talking about it. 30 years and yesterday, because any great trauma in your life, quite often 30 years, 10 years, 20 years later, the shock has worn off and you actually remember it more clearly then than you do at the time. This is what I think. I think that we move in soul groups, and that's why some people, you meet them, Janet, and you go, yeah, I know you. I know you in your very soul. And that's happened to me so many times. I think when it first happened, because also, I've said it's much more difficult to deal with other people's response to you. And I felt like people didn't see me anymore. They just saw this massive ball of grief that walked in front of me. And I used to actually visualize making it smaller, smaller, smaller and putting it in my pocket. And when I met people, I knew how difficult it was for them to say, oh, crikey, Nikki, So I used to make it right. I used to try and make it right for them. You used to try, make people feel easy about being around you. But it is like a physical ball of grief that you're going to push up an hill every time you go out. And, there's no other way of explaining it for me. It's heavy.
I was thinking the other day as I was walking along, I go out for my morning walks, and that's usually when my mind starts to kind of work at life out again. And I was thinking just yesterday, what if the heart doesn't get broken, but the heart gets reshaped? So rather than see the heart as like all bandaged and bruised and how can I go on? Just see it that actually the heart, even in tragic circumstances, the heart actually expands. And I think that's where the more compassion comes from. That so rather than it being broken, that it's growing into a different shape. And it's not that beautiful hallmark heart shape anymore. It's got some extra bits to it. And at that point, I thought, well, that helps me to walk a bit taller and feel a little bit stronger and more courageous by viewing it like that than a broken heart, which feels heavy and crushing. So that's kind of my visual that I've got going on in my head to help me survive a little bit.
I think you're definitely right, but I think we've always got to allow ourselves that little scar on the soul that will go through all eternity. I think we've always got to allow ourselves that little bit, that teeny weeny little mark on your
Yeah.
soul.
And maybe that's the sadness that isn't going to go. It's that sadness that comes. Special thanks to Nikki for joining me on the Good Grief Conversation and sharing her story. I really hope that you got a lot from that section. Don't forget, if you want to hear the full conversation, then go to www.thegoodgriefconversation.com and just click on the Listen Now button. And Nikki's is episode 3, so you will have to scroll down when you get to the page over on UK Health Radio. Scroll down and you'll find episode 3. And you can listen to the whole conversation. Nikki really is an inspiring woman. Now, I also asked my guests for gifts for you. So those gifts, they form part of the podcast extras. So if you go over to our website at thegoodgriefconversation.com and then click on podcast extras, then you can sign up for those. And there's a huge library of gifts from all of my guests. But Nikki made a very special gift, and that is a short video just for you. So you can take a look at that video by signing up to podcast extras. They are free, but if you want to donate and help to support this show and this conversation, then you also get the opportunity to do that too. But just go to podcast extras and come and join our community and sign up for that. So now my next guest is Wendy Black Stern. And Wendy, she's from Boulder in Colorado, an amazing woman. She lost her little son Noah at age just 9 months. And in this conversation, she shares that heartbreaking story, but how her little boy transformed her life. I will leave her to explain how that happened. I asked Wendy what inspired her to want to help others in the grieving state and what that looked like.
My initiation into grief work was very much through my own experience. And sometimes it's hard to say where the journey really began, but a significant part of my story is a huge experience I had of losing my first child. My son Noah passed away when he was 9 months old, and that really led me on a journey of self-discovery and of healing to figure out how to deal with this big loss.
Do you think that's what grief ultimately does? That it opens you up somehow to discover more of yourself?
I think it certainly has that potential. In my own life and what I witness in the people that I work with is that it is a powerful catalyst for our own becoming, in a sense, for not only self-discovery, but for our own personal transformation. And I know for me, it was like my world was shattered. It was like the rug being taken out from underneath. And there's a process that you go through of feeling, at least for me, completely lost. It affects identity. It affects every aspect of our being. Part of my story is that after Noah passed away, my husband and I, within 2 weeks of his death, we set out on a really big pilgrimage, in a sense. And we left the States and we traveled to Southeast Asia. We landed first in Bali, Indonesia, and then continued on to Thailand. And what we experienced in those cultures has been incredibly impactful for me and has, in many ways, informed my kind of personal path as well as professional path in supporting people with grief. We discovered a lot through these travels, but the biggest thing that has really stuck with me was just the way people received us in our grief and the culture's relationship to death and to grief.
Right.
People weren't afraid of it. They weren't uncomfortable with our pain. They weren't uncomfortable with our grief. They weren't uncomfortable with the topic of death, for they really do view death as a part of life. And so there's a level of acceptance and understanding that allowed them to really lean in towards us, to be open to hear our story, to be open to be in connection with us while we were in pain, rather than looking away, rather than kind of avoiding our eyes because it was uncomfortable. There was just a gentleness and an openness to it that really allowed us to grieve, to talk about what we were feeling, and to be able to kind of be in the world without having to pull in towards ourselves or isolate, and to hide our suffering. And that was a big contrast to what we felt in our world in the United States, where we have been blessed to have a beautiful community of family and friends who showed up, and they really, really showed up. And the culture in general was uncomfortable with our pain. No one knew how to talk to us or how to be with us. No one wanted to say Noah's name. It was like there was always the big elephant in the room. And part of the reason we left the country was that it was suffocating to kind of be feeling everyone's discomfort with our pain.
And a lot of people in the West isolate. You feel other people's discomfort is when that brings that pressure to you.
Yeah, I was going to say the thing we were seeking was, we were drawn to, Buddhist and Hindu cultures because we recognize that mindfulness, that being able to kind of sit and to kind of be in those practices would be helpful. Before I lost Noah, I had spent a year or 10 years working as a yoga therapist and a yoga teacher. So I had a lot of experience of witnessing the ways that our emotions manifest in our bodies, and also experiencing for myself the power of meditation to bring us closer towards ourselves, to work through all the things that happen in our lives. So we were seeking some guidance and direction from these cultures. And we certainly found that along our travels, as well as rituals and other ways that these cultures had to mark these experiences of death and loss. And they did it, sometimes it was through celebration, but it was through a deep honoring and a respect for just the cycles of life. And that was incredibly healing for us. The other thing that happened along our travels is we got pregnant with my daughter Hannah, and it was such a profound blessing. It was a month almost to the day after Noah had died. So many people told us it was too soon, but we prayed in every temple we visited in Bali and Thailand for another child. And I will say that was a huge jumpstart on our healing process, that we felt really blessed to be carrying a new life. And my daughter Hannah, in some ways, I feel kind of saved my life and gave me a reason to get out of bed in the morning, gave me hope. So our travels were a big part of our experience. And when we came home, it was hard to reintegrate. It was hard to be back in our world that was, for us, forever changed, to come back to life without Noah. But we carried on because that's what you do. And I think we got fed through our travels, through these other experiences and other people, that helped us to know our own resiliency, and it gave us a reason to keep going. So, life did carry on, and however many months later, we had Hannah. But a few years later, when Hannah was about 2, maybe even a little younger, I felt a really deep stirring to do something with this experience that I had been through. Because my husband and I, I'm really grateful to have a partner that I share the kind of connection with that I do. We really leaned in towards each other. And I know for some it can really tear you apart, and I get why. So it tends to go one way or the other. But for us, we had already been together a very long time. I met my husband, Brian, the love of my life, when I was 19 years old. So we had a strong foundation, and the process of self-discovery began. So we really leaned in towards each other to kind of create a new life and to evolve a new identity, even of kind of who we were together and who I was alone. And within this kind of stirring to like give back in some way and to do something with this, I decided to run a yoga therapy group that I had been trained to facilitate, and to do so for bereaved parents. And this is really was the seed form for what was yet to come. Yoga in and of itself is such a powerful modality, and it connects us to ourselves. It really unifies all the aspects of our being, and it offers us a powerful container to see ourselves, to know ourselves, to feel ourselves. So in this program, and I want to just give a shout out to Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy, the modality that I was first trained in, and to Michael Lee, the founder of Phoenix Rising, who really understood one of our leading pioneers of the ways that our emotions manifest in our bodies, and the power of going into our bodies as a way to access that and then to draw it forward. So in the process I was trained to facilitate, it took yoga and meditation, which are such direct conduits to our own inner knowing, right? And then with that, it brought it into community. So the way this differed than an individual yoga practice is that not only did it offer an individual container of self through our yoga practice, time on our mats and meditation, but it also brought people into the collective with each other. It created so much connection. And I had no idea how healing this would be for myself and for others, to be with other parents who could identify, who could be like, wow, my heart feels this, your heart feels this, we're the same, we're connected. And that feeling of connection was incredibly powerful for me and the other members of this group. So even though it started based on my own personal experience, it opened the door for me to understand the nature of grief actually better, not just through my own experience, but through the people I was working with. And I started to see how much the same we are. Like that my human heart is feeling this and so is yours. And it doesn't matter who or what we've lost, actually. That grief is really the process of making sense and working out a loss. Sometimes it takes losing something really important to recognize how much you have. So there is this absolute relationship between grief and gratitude. Opposite sides of the same coin, or grief and love might even be another way to say it. That as we grieve, as our hearts break, we learn to feel more. It's actually the turning in that brings us in a closer connection with ourselves, that actually soothes the anxiety and helps us to find our center. And from that place, grief becomes one of the greatest teachers in our life. And it doesn't take away the pain. And I won't say that you necessarily stop grieving, you stop missing, but it changes. And there's an opportunity for the loss to then be integrated into our beings. So if you're going through a recent loss and you are feeling isolated, and then even more isolated because you can't go out in the world and do the things you do, or maybe you couldn't even have a proper funeral or burial. I mean, that is part of our reality right now. To still reach out, or maybe be open to receiving those who you love, those who are closest to you. And this can happen through a screen, like we're doing right now. It can happen through a phone call. I'd say if you know someone who's going through a loss, the most important thing you could do is reach out and acknowledge it. Right here and now in our COVID world, right? It's the loss of our life as we knew it. For some people, all of a sudden you're isolated. It's the loss of being able to go into the world or go sit in a coffee shop, right? I mean, it can be at such a basic level. And so the intention and the mission of the Grief Support Network is to transform the way that individuals and our communities experience and work through loss.
Well, isn't Wendy truly an inspiration? Her story is amazing, and how she's used that to transform her life and to be able to help others with what she's discovered, and how she can pass that on and help other people. She's an amazing woman. She's over in Boulder, Colorado, and we had such a wonderful conversation. So don't forget, if you want to hear the full conversation, then head over to www.thegoodgriefconversation, and Wendy's episode is episode 21. So you can go and find that there and listen to the full conversation. So now my next guest, my final guest for today, is Ashley Jones. And Ashley, actually we have a lot in common, because Ashley is a photographer and I'm also a photographer, and of course her surname is Jones. She's also in America. She's in Atlanta in Georgia. Incredible woman. She's set up a charity called Love Not Lost, of which she will tell you more about. But sit back and enjoy Ashley's truly inspiring story of losing her little girl, Skylar.
So I was young when I became a parent. My husband and I had been married. We had just celebrated our 2nd year anniversary, and just weeks later, our daughter was born. And we were thrilled to be young parents. It was definitely a surprise, but it was one that we were figuring out and getting excited about. And we were sent home from the hospital with a healthy baby girl. And yeah, at 1 month old, I just knew something wasn't quite right. So she wasn't moving a whole lot, and her right arm had come up like a chicken wing. And so when I would pull it back down, it would just automatically come up. Like I could tell she wasn't controlling it. So I didn't know, like in my past, I had volunteered with severely handicapped kids. So I had seen cerebral palsy, I had seen seizures and epilepsy, I had seen a lot of different conditions. And her contractures reminded me of cerebral palsy, but I could tell mentally she was there. And so I brought it up to our pediatrician. We went through a bunch of, specialist appointments. And just a month later, at 2 months old, we got the diagnosis of spinal muscular atrophy, which is really similar to Lou Gehrig's disease. All the muscles degenerate and there's no cure. So we were told we would be lucky to see her first birthday, which was devastating. We were young parents. We were certainly the first of all of our friends to have a baby, let alone the first of all of our friends to lose a baby. So we didn't have any people to kind of like help us through that. And until one of our nurses, so we got set up with a team of doctors to kind of be our care team in this journey. And one of them was like, hey, I know this mom who just went through this. Let's connect you with her if she's open to it. And I didn't know that she had just lost her son in March, which was a month before I reached out to her. But she was so gracious and just really came alongside of us and helped us advocate for the best care for her. They donated a stroller to us, and like a special handicap stroller that's normally like thousands of dollars, and stuff that you just don't even think about needing. So anyway, I felt very fortunate, and she was able to kind of be my support through that. And then she had told us about donating her son's body to a researcher out in Utah, Dr. Sobota. And I really love that idea because I'm a huge believer in organ donation. So it's like, if I'm going to die and someone else can be saved, and I'm going to die anyway, And so knowing that all of our daughter's organs were going to be unusable, just deteriorated, it was one of those things, well, maybe we could help someone through that. Anyway, we had gotten on hospice at 10 months old. I called the researcher, and she actually gave us some things to do that ended up doubling her life. It was really cool, and we ended up donating her body to her team and burying her when she was 21 months old. It was so tough. And so during that time, we had a friend gift us a professional portrait session, and the photos that we had of our family really made such a huge difference in my grieving process. I mean, I'm sure, you hear stories like this all the time where it's like, I didn't know what to do with myself. Like you have all these hard emotions and like big emotions, and no one's teaching us how to grieve. And so that was something for me that the photos gave me a tangible space to feel and to be present and to just get out whatever I needed to express. to really help me on that healing journey. And so I wanted to do that for other people. I started donating photography sessions to anyone I heard of facing a terminal diagnosis, being a photographer myself. And that ended up developing into Love Not Lost, which is the nonprofit that I lead today. I kind of joke around. So our daughter's name was Skylar. Before Skylar, like BS is before Skylar, but also like my priorities before she came along were just total BS. I cared about wealth and image and name brands and what people thought of me and, you know, like just all of what society had brought me up in. And then when she came along and we got the diagnosis, and it was just this massive clarity of none of that matters. And when you die, you don't take any of that with you. And what you do take is the love that you have, and then the impact that you've left for others. So for me, it was like such a gift, honestly. I mean, I would never want to go through that and have Skylar die, but being able to look at what a gift it was in the sense of just life understanding and wisdom, I feel like very grateful for all of those lessons that I had to walk through. Really, I just sat and thought, well, okay, I'm still breathing. So I held her as she stopped breathing. And it was one of those things where I felt her take her last breath and I felt her heart stop beating. And it was one of those moments where I understood why people die of a broken heart. Like, it was so painful. And I was like, why am I still breathing? So one of the things that I realized is the stories that we tell ourselves and the actual words that we use really matter to our ability to heal or stay in pain. For example, like what you said, that our experience is terrible. Like, that's painful language that doesn't really honor what we went through and can keep us in a painful mindset. In the raw grief, like when you first lose the person you love, it's natural to be in that just awful pain. And so using language like that can be really helpful to just get the pain out and like express it. But I think where people get stuck in their grief, and this is where, as you were saying, you know, you've met people who aren't as resilient as I am, or, you know, who aren't able to move quickly through healing, is that sometimes the language holds us back. I would hear myself saying like, oh yeah, she was taken from me too soon. Like a piece of me died that day and I'll never get it back. Early on, that adequately, you know, described and accurately described how I was feeling. But over time, I knew that if I held on to that narrative, it would actually keep me in that place of pain. What I tried to do was to intentionally shift my language. Even if I didn't feel it, it was like, no, I believe that she came to fulfill her purpose. And her purpose was accomplished in 21 months, you know? And so like that makes me feel so much more proud that like my daughter came and she got it done, but also like her purpose was partly in waking me up, you know? And so now she's set me on a path to help thousands and thousands of people that I'm incredibly grateful for. And so just shifting my stories and my language really helped me get out of that victimization and being like, oh, this happened to me. And then instead shifting my mind to, no, this happened for me.
I asked Ashley about healing and what that meant for her.
I look at healing from loss as a transformation of new growth. Like, you think about when you cut your finger, your healing is your blood clots, it makes platelets, it starts healing, like covering the wound to stop the bleeding. And then new cells grow, and then your skin grows and it covers that cut. And then pretty soon your finger is whole again. So for me, it's like the healing is similar in that, you know, it's not like we've felt a wound. We've been, like you said, just broken wide open. And so to me, our healing is that we get to really stop and take a moment to reevaluate our life and then choose with intention how we want to rebuild it. And that rebuilding is the healing.
So you now found your purpose, and Skylar has had this phenomenal impact in your life, and the things that you do are just so special. So I want to talk about how you got to there. I know on your website you share a story of where you went to photograph this baby that this family had to say goodbye to, and you hadn't yet said goodbye to Skylar. But how do you do that?
Yeah, that was a really tough one. So Skylar was around 6 months old, I think. And we knew she was dying, obviously. And a neighbor of mine called me and said, hey, she was a doula. And so she was helping our other neighbor go through the labor and delivery process. And so she was like, hey, our neighbor just had her baby and he came out not breathing. Like, he was active during the whole labor, had a heartbeat and everything, and then just came out not breathing. So the hospital tried to do everything they could to save him. They ended up putting him on life support, and they had to choose to pull the plug. And so she was like, but before they do, would you please come in and take pictures? And I was like, oh no, there's a great organization that, like, their whole mission is to do this. Like, they photograph babies who don't make it home from the hospital, so you should just call them.
Yeah, call them. They're used to it.
Yeah. And she was like, well, we had a bad experience with one of their photographers, and so I'm hesitant to call them again. Plus, God told me to call you. And I was like, damn it. Thanks, God. It was truly one of those things, is like, how do you say no to that? Like, you know, I wanted to be there for our neighbor. And so I packed up my gear and went to the hospital, and I, you know, just was really focused on creating those really beautiful memories with them, and making sure that, you know, I had all the shots that I could possibly get that they would want, making sure that we did it in, you know, the most loving way possible, and just really captured their love that they shared together. And then family came in to say goodbye. And so I photographed some of the extended family saying goodbye. And then, you know, and meanwhile, I have tears streaming down my face during the session, but I held it together. I remember waiting for the elevator and just feeling like shocked and traumatized, because it was like, that was so intense. And then I cried the whole way home, like almost had to pull over because I couldn't see. I got home and then I had to edit the photos, and then I like ugly cried all over again. But again, like, I think part of that allowed me to grieve and feel what I needed to feel, because I think so often we, just as a human race, again, just the way our brain is wired, we are wired to avoid pain. And I think what happens, like, in avoiding pain, we survive, but that doesn't mean that we are fully experiencing life and enjoying the quality of life that we could if we could just lean into the pain.
Well, that concludes today's show, this very special show that we put together for Baby Loss Awareness Week. I hope that you've got lots and lots of things out of there and have been inspired by my wonderful guests, Nikki Pattinson, Wendy Blackstone, and the lovely Ashley Jones. So again, if you want to hear any of those conversations in full, then go to www.thegoodgriefconversation.com and just scroll down to listen now, and you'll get all of the shows. Nikki is episode 3, Wendy is episode 21, and Ashley's will be out next week, and she will be episode 24. So I'm sure you'll enjoy all of those conversations. It's been my absolute pleasure putting this program together and sharing this with you. But I could not do this without the help of my editor, John. And John, I know you're listening, so thank you very, very much for all your support. And for the support of UK Health Radio, who host my show and help me to get this very important conversation out to people all around the world. So if you know anybody who is grieving at the moment, going through a difficult time, any kinds of grief in divorce, relationship breakup, right down to the very heartbreaking loss of a child. So I am your host, I'm Janet Jones, and it's always my pleasure to bring these conversations to you. I hope that you will join me next week for even more conversation. In the meantime, take great care of yourself, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.